Let's continue with this examination of Bernard as a teacher about desire for God, who bases his doctrine of desire on the human nature that God has given to us. And part of that nature is we have a bias towards God. We have a yearning, an energy, a movement towards God. So we were in about the middle of page 5, I think. And so Bernard is very aware and likes to describe all the possibilities for going astray, and he knows quite well what sort of people we are, and he's under no delusions. But notwithstanding its limitation, through being bound up with the body, the soul retains its affinity with the Word. I think that's the bottom line, so to speak, of the image of God doctrine. That we are made like God. We are made with an affinity for God, with a taste for God, with a compatibility. It retains its affinity towards the Word in particular. This permanent condition Bernard describes with such terms as vicinitas naturae. That's a very, very, very cheeky one in a sense. Closeness of nature. We're next door neighbours to the Word. That's what it means. We live in the same village, vicus, and we are neighbours. And so the Word of God, by nature we are very close to the Word. Cognatio, he belongs to our family. The same crowd. Affinitas, the same thing. We have the same destination. Finis. Propinquitas, all abstract terms. Closeness. Convenientia, compatibility. We don't clash. So anybody that says, I'd love to be spiritual, but it's not my nature, that's not the way I'm built for other things, is telling a fib, according to St. Bernard, that by nature we have a convenientia. There is a basic compatibility for spiritual things. We don't have to distort ourselves. It's a little bit like running a 4-minute mile. I don't know if any of you are into that kind of business, but I never do, during the winter at any rate. But to run a 4-minute mile is basically the only way that you can extract that type of performance out of the human being is to deny all sorts of other things and just whip the nature, whip the person until he runs faster and faster and faster. He's goaded by ambition or goaded by something or other, and you end up with a distortion of the nature. I remember seeing a film of a rather objectionable person called Stephen Holland, who was an Australian swimmer. I don't know what Olympic Games it was. It could have been Montreal. I'm not sure. But he's about 18. He held the world record for the 1500 metres and so forth, and he thought that he was going to win a gold medal at the Olympic Games. And it just showed one of his typical days. And he would be up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and he would put on his swimming togs and put on his goggles and swim up and down that bloody pool for 4 hours. Up and down and up and down. And then he would get out and eat his dietitian designed breakfast, and then he would go to a gym and do all sorts of other things. Then he would be back in the pool. Then, this was his whole day, 7 days a week, every day. As St. Paul says, they do it for a perishable crown. Well, the irony of it was that he won a bronze medal, that was all. His mouth was bigger than his swimming muscles, but the interesting thing is that it ruined his life. For several years he left school early at 14 or something in order to be able to concentrate on his swimming. Pat Cash, exactly the same, comes from quite near our monastery. They're all very admirable and so forth, but he was expelled from at least 2 of the local Catholic schools because he never came to school. Because he's playing tennis and training all the time. So his In case of Stephen Holland, his education was incomplete. He had no social life at all. He was utterly kind of miserable because all his energy was invested in swimming. It was a kind of, he's become so specialized that he didn't live except for his swimming. And then when he didn't get a gold medal, of course, he flipped. And now, religion is not like that. There are people who describe religion in those terms. It's a kind of interesting specialization. You bind yourself up and forget about this and forget about the other thing and throw away everything else and just concentrate all your energy on one kind of thing. In that case, it's a distortion of nature. Whereas what Bernard is saying is, no, religion, on the contrary, is a flowering of all components in our nature. So it's not a question of shooting all the horses, but of getting them to run in the right direction. It's a question not of denying anything at all that is within us, but rather simply of getting it to help us go in the direction which our will has chosen. And that's why it's a very optimistic kind of thing, and far more optimistic anthropology than many which seem at first sight to be more attractive. He's completely convinced that all that is truly natural in us is permanent and will eventually, or can eventually, lead us to God, will certainly take part in the resurrection of the body. So that's why he uses, when we talk about God, we're close to him. We live in the same village as God. Vicinitas naturae. We belong to the same generation, cognatio, cogeneratio. We are going in the same direction, affinitas. We are nearby to God. There is a compatibility. We can't get a divorce on the grounds of incompatibility. We are compatible with God. In other words, God suits me the way I am. That's what he's saying. That in some senses, the way that my nature is fashioned, there is a real compatibility. The human person retains, irrespective of any sin or other disfiguration, a permanent compatibility, capacity, and desire for union with God. So it's a very, very strong doctrine and can be supported. We'll see this coming up in some of the texts that follow. Bernard explains the theological basis of this in a difficult but worthwhile passage. Some of these passages read all right in Latin. When you start to translate them, they look a bit strange. So we don't deny the difficulty of these things. This one that follows, I think that we'd understand it a little bit better if we remember what I said about the idea of the ad imaginem, which I've translated as to the image. I might read this one myself because it's could be a bit confusing otherwise. Why do you join these two things? What has the soul in common with the Word? And I reply that the soul has a lot in common with the Word, and in many ways. In the first place, they are closely related in that the Word is the image and the soul is to the image. Now, do you get what he's saying there? The Word is imago, the image of the unseen God. The soul is created ad imaginem. So it has already a dynamic movement towards the Word. Secondly, likeness attests to this affinity. In other words, insofar as we are like the Word, then it shows that we have this affinity. For man was made not only ad imaginem, to the image, but also ad similitudinem, to the likeness. So, you may rightly ask, in what does this likeness consist? How can I be like the Word? In what direction must I grow? First of all, listen to what I have to say about the image. The Word is truth and wisdom and justice. It is in these qualities that the imagehood of the Word consists. Hence, the Word is the image of justice. You'll notice a capital letter for justice there. The capitals in this passage are probably all intentional. In other words, I do make mistakes in typing. Nobody can be entirely without error, but my most serious ones are typing errors. But but in this passage the capitals are all correct, right? So justice meaning just God as justice, subsistent justice. So hence the word is the image of subsistent justice, the image of subsistent wisdom, and of subsistent truth. This image, small I, is justice from justice, wisdom from wisdom, and truth from truth, in the same way that he is light from light and God from God. So what Bernard is going to be getting on to say is that you have God, the divine nature of the Father, which is justice and wisdom and truth. You have this assumed into the Word to be justice, wisdom, and truth. We will become like the Word insofar as our life is characterized by justice, wisdom, and truth. Justice is a most neglected teaching of Bernard, as it is with Benedict. It occurs a number of times in the rule, but he's very insistent on it in his mystical array, you might say, is justice. Preparation for Christmas, one of the means is through justice. So he's saying that to be like the Word, you must be characterized by justice and wisdom and truth. So we're going to the next page. Now, the soul is none of these things. None of you people are just and truthful and wise, since it's not the image itself. It is, however, capable of them. In other words, we're capable of receiving from the Word justice and truth and wisdom. It is, however, capable of them and desirous of them. It's got the void, and where it has the void, where it has the desiderium, the capacity, there it has the affective capacity, the affective feeling of desire. What a lofty what a lofty creature is the soul in its capacity for majesty and in its preference for seeking what is upright. For we read that God made man upright, and that it was this quality which made him great. This confirms that man has such a capacity, for it is right that what was made to the image should have some agreement with the image itself. Otherwise it would share only the title image and nothing else. From God, who is upright and great, the image has received uprightness and greatness, and it is from the image that the soul has received these qualities, because it exists in a state of being ad imaginem. Now, I don't deny that that's a difficult text, and particularly difficult to read in the first session of the afternoon. So perhaps the best thing is just to leave it there and to suggest that you might like to come back to it and have a look at it yourself and just try and nut out what it is that St. Bernard is saying. There is, however, a couple of other famous texts about how we receive from Christ all virtues, and I'll just read three of them now. The origin, the first one is a very famous one. The origin of all streams and springs is the sea. The origin of all virtues and sciences is the Lord Jesus. From this source flow forth continence of the flesh, all heartfelt effort, and all righteousness of will. Whatever wisdom or virtue you believe that you possess, you must refer to Christ, because he is God's wisdom and virtue. Exactly the same point, isn't it? We don't get it directly, we get it from our association with the Word. We don't generate it for ourselves. And that text is from Supercantica 13.1. The next one is 86.3, and the one after that is 22.11. Second text, 86.3. All things are to be found in him. There is the remedy for wounds, there help in time of trouble, quoting Simon and Garfunkel, there the repair of what is deficient, there the progress which comes from plenty, and there finally is everything that the human being should receive or possess, everything that's beautiful, everything appropriate. So we get everything from him. And the third one, 22.11, Anyone who works hard to acquire virtues does so in vain. So, is that interesting to anybody? I'll read the rest of it. I don't know whether it applies to anybody here, but we'll read it. Anyone who works hard to acquire virtues does so in vain if he hopes to find them anywhere else except in the Lord of virtues, Dominus Virtutum, the Lord God Sabaoth, the Lord of virtues that was translated in Latin. His teaching is the seedbed of prudence, his mercy is the work of justice, his life is the mirror of temperance, his death is the banner of fortitude. So it's just a general way that Bernard understands that we don't generate virtues of our own, but we get them from our association with the Word. And this means that we don't clean ourselves up, as it were, and get a few virtues to stick in our hair, and then we are able to be united to the Word. But rather it's by our union with the Word that our virtues come to flourish. And the same thing happens in human affairs. That I remember one of my sisters-in-law telling me she has all sorts of abstruse knowledge in all sorts of arcane subjects, because when she was at university she had a number of different boyfriends, and from one of them she picked up a bit of geology, and another one she picked up a bit of astronomy, and another one she picked up something about how cars work. And what I'm saying is that when we have a relationship, some of the good things of the other person in the relationship rub off. And this is what Bernard is saying. You don't look for virtues. You don't go down to the virtue factory and start the engines up and try to generate wisdom or justice or truth. If you do that, you'll get nowhere. But rather you simply go as you are in all your rotten, foul-smelling state to the Word. You accept to be loved by the Word, and in the relationship with God, these things come off. There's a very beautiful thing. I'm not quite sure if I've used it before here. I use these images in a number of different cases. Certainly used it at Rentham. Bernard talking about the apple. Have I talked about that? One of his beautiful sermons. So they used to have different apples in the Middle Ages. Where he says, if you put an apple in your hand and hold it there for a while and take the apple away and smell your hand, you can smell the apple. I don't think the apples are as strong as that these days. And he uses it with reference to the Virgin Mary. He says, how holy she must have been if the Word of God dwelt within her womb for 9 months. That something must have rubbed off. And so, using this image of the apple, that we pick up virtues, we pick up good qualities, not through making them of ourselves, but simply through our union with God, which, hanging around with Him, being associated with Him, eventually His way of evaluating things and doing things and setting up a certain style of living rubs off on us. So the bottom line is, don't cultivate virtues, but rather cultivate Christ. It's as simple as that, because good things then rub off on you. The most sterile thing in the world is trying to be good, if any of you have ever tried it. But because you become very pleased with yourself that you fast twice a week and so forth. And virtue separates you from people, whereas true virtue rubs off. Religion is caught, not taught. Human imagehood is accordingly derivative. It is the effect of man's having been created with an innate ordering to the Word, who is the perfect image of God. Here there are undertones of Greek patristic thought, probably at several removes, according to which the life of the image is to seek its archetype. And we can get into some real baffling texts here, if you'd like, to completely bedizen your wits afternoon. But by way of mercy, we won't do those. So the whole being in the Word consists in being towards the Father, and also paradoxically from the Father. And the whole being of what was created ad imaginem consists in being towards the Word and in union with the Word towards the Father. And so it's significant that at the end of this anthropological block, Bernard takes up in the early, from about 80 to 83, Bernard takes up in 84 and 85 the theme of seeking God and seeking the Word. So right at the very end there, he's getting into some fairly heavy sort of thinking, but moves then practically into the theme that therefore we should seek our whole, if all our virtue is to come from association with the Word, then all our energy should be spent in seeking God, in seeking the Word, in the experiences of everyday life. Now we pass on to the theme of rectitude, rectitudo, which I have translated uprightness. It's used by Bernard as a symbol of man's ability to gaze into the heaven, and thus of his spiritual powers. So I'd like just to show some art to entice the eye. The theme of uprightness, or rectitudo, is something like that. Uprightness, notice the Southern Cross there. That's how we were created. The specific difference between human beings is that although, you remember the famous thing of St. Augustine, why is a human being like an eagle? Human being is like the eagle because they're the only two creatures that have the possibility of having their feet on the ground and their head in the heaven. And in other words, we are established on earth. You can't see the ground there. We'll come up a little bit. There you are. See, he's got his feet on the ground and his eyes directed towards the heavens. It's a very common theme among the fathers, that what separated man from the beasts in the creation was that they went on two legs. And so, because they're on two legs, they don't have to spend the time looking at the dirt, but rather they've got the ability to gaze up to heaven, gaze up to the skies and so forth. So if that's what rectitudo is, the abasement of humanity is what is called a bent soul. If somebody is bent, which is the anima curva, bent over like that, like an animal. Instead of looking up at the skies, it looks down to the muck on the earth, and a total deviation, total distortion of human being. We were made to look up at the skies, made to have all our desires going to beyond, into the beyond. But instead, we bend over and we get onto four feet like the beasts and just look straight down onto the earth. And that's the language that may be helpful when we come to read this next passage. The difference between rectitudo, which I said neither of the existing translations in English recognizes this point in translating this passage. They translate it righteousness and give it an unnecessarily preachy kind of sound. But it's not righteousness. He's talking about the physical component of creation. And Gregory of Nyssa talks in very similar veins repeatedly. And if you want a reference, there's his treatise on virginity, number 5. There are some parallels, but I don't think Bernard is derivative, not directly. So he's commenting on the text, recti diligente of the Song of Songs, the upright love you. And so he says, well, who are those that love the bridegroom? Who are those that love the word? And he says, I'm sure that nobody with an upright mind could be of the opinion that those who possess mere bodily uprightness are the ones referred to as loving the bride. So it's not just if you stand on 2 feet that you're automatically to be numbered among the bride's lovers, bridegrooms, or the bride. It will be shown that in this context there is a question of spiritual uprightness, which is something that belongs to the soul. It's the spirit who speaks. He compares spiritual realities with other spiritual realities. When God is said to have made man upright, this is to be understood primarily of the soul, not of the earthly excrement of matter. There he goes again. It's him, not me. God created man in his own image and likeness. It is the Creator who is referred to in the verse of the psalm, "The Lord our God is upright, there is no iniquity in him." Therefore, the God who is upright made man to be upright and thus like himself. This is to say that he was made to be without iniquity, since there is no iniquity in him. Now, what is iniquity? Well, iniquity is not an aberration of the flesh, but of the heart. Very interesting statement there for moral theologians and so forth, and similar things come up a number of times. Hence, likeness to God is to be preserved or recovered, not in the crude clay of matter, but in your spiritual part. God is himself a spirit, and he wills that those who persevere in his likeness or grow into it should enter into their hearts and be active within their spirits in this affair. If they do this, then when they gaze upon the glory of God, they will be transformed from brightness to brightness by the Lord who is Spirit into that same image. God also endowed man with an upright stature, so that this bodily uprightness in man's outer and less precious component might serve as an encouragement to the inner man made to God's image, that it might maintain its quality of spiritual uprightness. In this way, the beauty of clay serves as a reproach in the case of deformity of soul. So what he's going to say, look in the mirror, aren't you beautiful? What a pity you haven't got a beautiful soul. Isn't it a scandal that you're made to look so beautiful and yet within is all deformity? What can be more grotesque than to have a bent soul in an upright body? So he says we don't really become like the beasts and run around on four trotters, but rather we remain upright on our feet, but it's our soul that gets bent, the anima kuruva. It's our desires that go down to the things of earth, that drag us down. It's a foul and twisted thing that this vessel of clay, which is the body made of dust, should have its eyes uplifted and freely gaze at the skies and take delight in the beauty of the heavenly bodies, while the spiritual creature is the opposite, having its eyes, which are the inner senses and affects, dragged down to earth. What should be feeding upon delicacies is instead wallowing in the mud, like a pig covering itself with its ordure. A very great challenge to the translator, these texts. But that's what the man says. Thus, says the body, look at me, O soul, and blush. You have exchanged the divine likeness for that of the beasts. Although you are from heaven, you roll around in filth. You were made upright, like your Creator, and given a helpmate similar to yourself, also upright according to bodily bearing. Wherever you turn, whether to God above or to me, that is, to the body below, for no one can hate his own flesh, you will encounter the familiar admonition of wisdom's teaching, reminding you constantly of your beauty and dignity. See this, he's saying, all right, you're bent, you've got your eyes turned out, but your beauty and your dignity remains. You need only just to recover it. Are you not ashamed that you have lost your uprightness? Why should the Creator preserve your likeness in me with so much care when he sees that his likeness in you has been utterly voided? The help due to you from me you have twisted to your own undoing. You have abused my service. You are a brute and bestial spirit, unworthy to dwell in a human body. So Bernard hasn't got anything against the body. He's saying the problem is that our spirits, our hearts, our will don't deserve such beautiful bodies. They have defiled them. They have abused them by exalting them out of their order. You are a brute and bestial spirit, unworthy to dwell in a human body. Souls bent in this manner are not able to love the bridegroom. So in other words, if our desires carry us down to the earth, if our desires cause us to bend and become like the beasts, then we're not able to love the bridegroom. We're looking for self-gratification or something else, since they are not his friends, but friends of the world. As it is written, anyone who wants to be a friend of this world makes himself God's enemy. To seek and take delight in the things which are on this earth is to have a bent soul. There's a definition for you. Examine your conscience. Are you bent? Are you a brute and bestial spirit, unworthy to dwell in a human body? Well, do you seek and take delight in things which are on this earth? Bit of exaggeration there, isn't it? But you know what he's saying. To seek and take delight in things which are on this earth is to have a bent soul. Uprightness, on the contrary, consists in constantly keeping in mind and in desire the things that are above. So obviously talking in terms of Colossians 3, the whole idea of spiritual ascension, that we should follow the ascent of Christ, keeping our minds and our desires fixed on the things which are above. For this to be complete, the thought has to be supplemented by an act of the will. So it's not enough simply to think about good things. Whatever is true and noble and honourable, think about these things. What we have also to do is to give our will to them, to assent to them in an ordinary everyday life. Again, you'll find with a lot of these texts that you just have to read them over quietly yourself. But the general direction that he's saying there is, it's a little complicated, the dialogue between the body and the soul and so forth, but it's fairly clear what he's saying. We're created to look upright, to gaze at the stars, and to take delight and to find pleasure in heavenly realities. And when we allow ourselves to be dragged down to other things, then we are bent, we're crooked, we're deformed, we're denying our own spiritual potentialities, and so we have to unbend, if you like. We have to become upright again. And how do we become upright? By not seeking and taking delights in things which are on this earth, but on the contrary, constantly keeping in mind and in desire the things that are above. You are truly upright, I say, if uprightness characterizes all that is in your mind and if it is not negated by what you do. In other words, we're coming back to this thing this morning of consistency, that our behavior actually corresponds with our will, which corresponds with our beliefs, which corresponds with our nature. If I'm that sort of person, I'm very harmonious. Everything is integrated. Everything that's puritas cordis, purity of heart. When I go to pray, there's very little to distract me, simply because everything is flowing in the same direction. My nature, my beliefs and values, my will, the act of will, and what I do. And that's, most religious traditions talk about spiritual growth in those terms. Integration of all of us so that we're one and not many. You are truly upright, I say, if uprightness characterizes all that is in your mind and if it is not negated by what you do. For it is faith and action which make known the invisible condition of the soul. We know what sort of people we are by our faith and by what we do. This theme is fairly consistent in Bernard's teaching, and different aspects of it occur frequently, sometimes in surprising circumstances. For example, he begins by reflecting on the pilgrim status of the soul, and then contrasts its present indignity with its future glory. By way of example, he cites St. Paul's lowly external appearance compared with his lofty spiritual attainments, and uses this as a starting point for a consideration of the indifference of the saints to their grooming. So he says, this is why the saints, having scorned the adornment and extravagant care of the outer man, which will certainly perish, give all their industry and time to cultivating and grooming the inner man, which is to the image of God and which is renewed day to day. For they are convinced that nothing is more pleasing to God than his own image once it is restored to its real beauty. So the beauty of the human being is important for Bernard, and it's a word that comes up a great deal, the beauty and nobility and dignity of the human being. And it's interesting, we had an archbishop some time ago who'd done a doctorate of philosophy at Louvain in the 30s, and he could get highly indignant about the scholastics. And he used to pound the table and get furious because they'd never included beauty among the transcendental qualities of being. You know, they had one and something and true and good, but they refused to include beauty. But generally, scholasticism found beauty a difficult thing to handle. And so it became a subsection of truth and goodness, kind of combination. But, you know, Bernard is always talking about beauty. Gregory of Nyssa, likewise, the beauty of the soul, the thirst for beauty, and so forth. And really, it's a whole integrated concept, I think, which describes better what we desire. I mean, we may desire truth, we may desire goodness, but fundamentally our desire is that attraction for that kind of overlap of truth and beauty which goes together. And we'll see so often that Bernard speaks about beauty, the beauty of the soul, deforming the beauty of the soul. It's not just a rhetorical image, but the conviction that each human being has received a measure of beauty, and that it's our job to uncover that beauty and to let it be seen for what it is. Black but beautiful is interpreted as meaning her beauty is on the level of the understanding. Her appearance is spiritual, even eternal, since she, that's anima, is the image of eternity. And it's pretty powerful stuff. The anima, my soul, is an image of eternity. That's why it's so beautiful. Just let me tell you that I have a beautiful soul. You should say that to yourself 3 times a day, especially when everybody else tells you something different. Whatever meets the eye is rightly judged as worthless and foul compared to the inner beauty of the saintly soul. For I say, what can be found in this passing world to rank with the beauty of such a soul who, having removed the old garments of the earthly man, has been clothed with the beauty that comes from heaven? In all that it does, it is adorned with the jewels of excellence. It is purer than the ether and more radiant than the sun. Human beings must therefore labour constantly to reproduce the image of eternity in all that is done, notwithstanding the alternations and vicissitudes which are the ordinary concomitant of life. Bernard avers that to avoid being swept away by the fluctuations of superficial change, it's necessary to base one's options not on the external factors nor on emotions, but on the underlying stability which characterizes the soul. The soul's basic movement is always there to link into, to carry us towards God. And that stability, stabilitas mentis, is always there. We can always make contact with that stability. And that will give us a basis not to be swept away by problems or difficulties or persecutions of other people on the one hand, or by our own ups and downs of mood and emotion and attitude. So then, let hope not desert you when times are bad. Don't become hopeless, nor foresight in good times. If things are going well, be careful. As I said in Rentham, let she who stands take care lest she fall. Changing the text of St. Paul. The one who stands must beware of falling, and so have foresight in good times. In this way you will be, in some sense, an image of eternity in the way you cope with changing seasons of profit and adversity. You will have the unassailable and unshaken evenness of disposition which comes from a firm soul. You ride the storms, you'll have stability, you won't be upset. But if you allow yourself to be hooked, and your moods to be hooked into external events, that if your football team loses, then you're down. If the sun shines, you're up. And your moods are generally a computation of, the different 15 factors feeding in which determine your happiness. What you had for dinner, whether the abbot or abbess smiled at you or frowned at you, and all this kind of thing. But Bernard is saying if you want evenness of disposition, if you want a kind of steadiness, well, you've got to get beyond external events, beyond being conditioned by external events and by the emotional impact of them, and learn to base yourself on spiritual realities. This is the way by which you will win for yourself a permanent state of unchangeableness, even in this capricious world of doubtful outcomes and certain defeats. If you've got something to hang on to, if you know you're heading in a certain direction, if most of your energies are going there, well, we live in a world of doubtful outcomes and certain defeats, both external and internal. And otherwise you're going to be bowled over completely by them. For you will begin to be renewed and reformed according to the ancient and distinguished image of the eternal God, with whom there is no change, nor any shadow of alteration. And he is so even in this world, as he is, so even in this world you also shall be, neither fearful in hard times, nor lacking in discipline when things go well. So he's saying to get some sort of evenness into our life, we need to hook into more fundamental currents of movement. The great statement of Winston Churchill in his one of his books, where he says, the study of history is the right understanding of history is a matter of concentrating on the tides and not the eddies. You know what the eddies are? These little bits of water that go round on the surface. And so if we're seeking for wisdom, if we're really going to understand the currents of history, well, we have to look at the tides, the big fundamental movements of water, and not concentrate on the little eddies on the circle, on the surface. And to do that, you have to be back a distance. Well, it's a bit the same with our own emotional life, with our own moral life, with our own spiritual life. To pay attention not so much to the eddies, the little things that go round and round and round on the surface. All right, we get annoyed about things, we get excited about things and so forth, but not to allow these to upset us, but rather concentrate on who we are, what we're looking for in life, what we're doing it, and how to implement the major lines of policy, and not to worry too much about minor things, minor defeats, minor successes, minor accolades, minor insults. But progressively to focus on the great important things of life, and to invest most of our energy in trying to be as harmoniously moving towards God as possible. I mean, it's very, very unjust to some people to get after them about things like punctuality. And you know, there are some people that don't have a very clear notion of time, and are always running late or arriving 10 minutes early or something like that. Now, it would be possible for somebody in authority or something to say, you know, all right, number one thing with you, be punctual. You know, concentrate all your efforts. This is the will of God, that you be punctual. And people say, yes, I'll do that. But the trouble is that all their energy is going into something which comes very, very difficult to them, and which possibly has very little signification in the whole scheme of things anyhow, because once they get used to the system, they'll be a little bit more punctual naturally. But what it's doing, it's diverting important energy that's meant to carry them in an important direction towards trivialities. And, you know, it's one of the things that's always been very strong in our community, that, you know, novices and junior professors are generally very much are full of all sorts of overt faults, simply because they're the sort of people that have only limited energy. And it's better that they expend that energy in dealing with the fundamental questions that are facing them, instead of making sure their shoes are always cleaned and their hair is parted. It's possible for us to waste a lot of time on trivialities. And when you've only got a little bit of spiritual energy, and that's the way most of us start off and perhaps stay for a lot of our lives, well, we better make sure that it's invested in a blue ribbon stock, in something that's really fundamental and is worthwhile, something that will eventually allow these other things to be mixed up. St. Benedict has the same idea. He said, be careful about scraping off the rust, because if you scrape off the rust, you might find there's nothing underneath it. And sometimes, and generally I think the case is, that people come to us and they're only rust. And if you can scrape off all the rust, and then you find they disappear. But you've got to stay with the rust, and ironically, something solid grows up underneath it. Then, and when there's something solid there, and you know there's something solid there, then you can afford to scrape off the rust. We'll just finish this bit and we'll go then. As he is, so even in this world you also shall be, neither fearful in hard times, nor lacking in discipline when things go well. This noble creature, nobilis creatura, who is made in the image and likeness of his Maker, demonstrates that he has received the dignity worthy of this ancient honour, and that even now it is effecting recovery. See, it's working. Huh? This thing is always working at us, you know, trying to get us back on the right track, trying to cause us to come back to God. That even now is effecting recovery when he considers it unworthy of himself to conform to this passing world. And suddenly he says, hang on, I could do better than this. That's his first thought. How many of the servants in my Father's house have full meals, and here am I dying for want of a bit of bread? So the prodigal son, it's this kind of energy of the image that even independent of the will, starts churning out thoughts that say, listen, I don't have to be such a rotten swine the way I am. I could be a little bit better. I could go home. I could do this. I could do the other thing. And so we start, even when we're mired in the excrement of sin, we start thinking thoughts of good. That's the first stage. He aims rather at being reformed, according to St. Paul's teaching, in a newness of understanding, and in that same likeness according to which he confesses that he was made. In this way he duly forces the world to be conformed to him for whose sake it was made. By such a marvellous reversal, all things begin to work together unto good in their proper and natural form without any deviance, because they acknowledge as their Lord him in whose service they were created. We'll come back on that one later on and just say a little bit before moving on.